Welcome everyone to the last conference of the first cycle, or Phase A, of the Self-Knowledge course. This is the 50th lecture of the course. This course has the purpose of leading us to understand the purpose of our existence, and giving us the tools so that we can get to know ourselves. Knowing ourselves involves eliminating from within us everything that we are not, all our fears, concepts, beliefs, wrong ways of reacting, feeling, thinking, acting, speaking, all our fornication, laziness, envy, jealousy, greed, etc. Since trapped in all these egoic conditioning is 97% of our being. Only when we have eliminated all of our ego, and have crystallized our 7 bodies with that released energy, will we have integrated our being, and will reach full knowledge of ourselves. Throughout this course we have talked about the need to eliminate from within us all those negative ways of being, psychological defects, or I's, that make up our ego. So, to close this cycle of the course, we will do so by explaining at what moment in our passage, as divine sparks on this planet, what we call the ego was formed in us. We will analyze the different aspects that participated in the moment when the ego was created. The first thing we must understand is the objective for which the humanities of the different planets are created. This objective is none other than to give the divine sparks that emanate from the sacred absolute sun the opportunity to become solar men, beings of awakened consciousness. Each planet must host 7 great races, in a process that takes hundreds of millions of years. This planet Earth on which we live has already housed 5 races. These had their golden age, then their silver age, then their bronze age, and finally their iron age. And when the iron age ended, the existence of that race ended. A race generally ends thanks to great cataclysms. And when that time comes for the end of a race, a selection of people from that race is always kept so that they become the founders, or precursors, of the new race. Each race involves the appearance of 7 subraces. We are currently in the 6th subrace of the 5th race, known as the Aryan race, and we are in the Iron Age of this race. The ego in the sparks of this planet was formed in the middle of the 3rd race, known as the Lemur race. We are talking about 18.5 million years ago. Before the Lemur race, 2 races had already existed on the planet, the first known as the polar or protoplasmic race, and the second known as the Hyperborean race. Until then the races had been androgynous, that is to say, that the beings of those races were feminine and masculine at the same time, but without external sexual organs. And the beings of the 3rd race, or Lemur race, in their beginnings had been hermaphrodites, that is, they were male and female at the same time, but with external sexual organs. But, at that point of evolution, shared sex was already necessary, so that humanity had the opportunity to reach the level of gods. They were already prepared for this process, and the separation of the sexes then began to occur. This is how humanity was divided into men and women, or the Adams and the Eves. All the stories regarding the creation of man found in the different sacred or ancient texts symbolically represent this transcendental event, which defined humanity so that they could achieve self-realization. Female bodies were already ready to start having sex in company. All the Lucifers accepted this challenge. Let's remember from the last lecture that the Lucifer is the desire in us, which is a part of our being. And, at this time, the Lucifers told human beings that if they wanted to be like the gods, they would have to taste the fruit. That fruit was sex shared with a partner. For this, the gurus or masters, guides of this humanity, were entrusted to direct these sexual practices. All couples should go to the temple for practicing sex. The practice of sex was a very sacred ritual, which was only carried out in the temple, and was done for 2 purposes. The first was to reproduce the species. This was done without the need to spill the semen, but rather a single sperm was directed to fertilize the woman's egg. And the second purpose was to create the superior existential bodies of the being, which are created by transmuting sexual energy. So, in order to advance in the process that would take them to a higher level of consciousness, each spark had to begin working with the two trees, the tree of life, which was the tree of sex, and the tree of good and evil, which was the tree of wisdom for self-realization. The tree of life would lead them, through sex, to be born spiritually, and to develop within them the tree of the Sephiro, made up of the different parts of the being. And the tree of good and evil would lead them to the experimentation of the ego, to extract wisdom from good and evil, so that these liberated consciousnesses could serve as raw material for creation. These two trees have common roots or share their roots with each other. Both trees are within us and have their roots in our sexual part. From the sexual center upwards the tree of life develops. From the sexual center downwards the tree of good and evil develops. But in the absence of ego as such, that is, of the direct experience of good and evil, the development of wisdom, and therefore of creation, was very slow and limited. Under these circumstances, a cosmic event happened that helped accelerate the human evolutionary process. At that time, the planet went through a very strong natural catastrophe, where a comet known by the name of Condor appeared in the sky and crashed into planet Earth. As a result of this collision of worlds, the Earth's crust was destabilized, which basically made the subsistence of the race impossible, as it caused calamities such as floods and tectonic events. To stabilize it again, they sent a sacred commission to Earth, headed by the arch-physicists and arch-chemists Loasis and Sakaki, to solve that problem. The Sacred Commission resolved to install in all human beings the kundabuffer organ, which should stabilize the Earth's crust. The kundabuffer organ was literally a tail that would fulfill the function of being a transmitter of cosmic energy from the human microcosm to the planet. This tail condensed in an inverted way the energy that the human body received daily, making this energy heavy, and when transmitted to the planet, it helped it stabilize and materialize. It is noteworthy that this experiment had already been carried out on other planets in the universe, and that this simultaneously allowed the level of wisdom of each planet to be established. The length of time that they left the tail on people's bodies would determine the level of evil that the tree of wisdom could condense. Therefore, at that time it was determined that the degree of wisdom for this planet would be 4, that is, it would be a planet on which beings could develop to the level of Christs or Masters. This is a fairly high level of wisdom. To achieve this, the kundabuffer's tail was left 3.5 days too long. This doesn't refer to physical 24-hour days, but to esoteric days, which refer to levels of consciousness. In reality, it took a very long period, perhaps hundreds or thousands of years, until the sparks reached the set level. With this, the level of evil for the tree of wisdom would be established, since the tree of wisdom extends in us from sex downward. The energetic action of this tail of the kundabuffer caused an astral tide, or lustful wave on the planet, which unbalanced all human beings, leading them to practice sex outside the temple. They no longer waited until they went to the temple, and they started having sex without the direction of the gurus. The increase in sexual desire that they experienced due to the action of that lustful wave, added to the lack of direction during sexual practices, led them to succumb to desire, and to fall into the ill will of fornicating or spilling the sexual creative energy outside of the amphora. Until that moment the sparks lived in paradise, which are higher levels of consciousness. But upon expelling their sexual energy from the body, they immediately descended in their levels of consciousness, and as a result we were expelled from paradise. At that moment the fall of men occurred from the higher levels of consciousness in which they found themselves. The causal, mental, astral, vital, and physical principle fell. And the second nature, the egoic nature, was created in the inhabitants of the planet. We can see that until that moment the sparks were innocent, they didn't know evil. Additionally, the kundabuffer's tail was left installed so that the sparks would reach where they needed to. 97% of our essence was trapped in the different negative ways of being that were rapidly creating and multiplying as sexual energy continued to be poured out. Over time, Humans became terribly perverse. They became hypnotized and fascinated in evil, to the point where they were no longer interested in the self-realization of the being. Their consciousness ended up falling asleep completely, they lost their faculties, and gradually forgot the purpose of their existence. They began to experience the emptiness of disconnection from their being. Some began to commit suicide. There was no longer a reason to exist. Therefore, the Sacred Commission returned to planet Earth to remove the kundabuffer organ, since it had already achieved its objectives, which were to stabilize the planet and establish the level of evil. This level of evil was the necessary ego, so that the wisdom that would turn those sparks into masters could be rescued from it. The tail was physically removed from us, which is why we have that protuberance at the end of the spine known as the coccyx bone, which is like the vestige of that tail. But in our astral plane the tail remained, there are our infradimensions, and there is condensed all our ego and the essences trapped in it. We can, through astral projection, confirm that we do indeed have a tail. And the more perverse we become, that tail lengthens and thickens. That is why we see that demons are always represented with a tail. The tail was removed, but the planet remained in the most absolute materialism. We forgot about the spiritual and become fascinated with the material, with pleasure and pain. Human beings became accustomed to fornicating and became fascinated with the pleasure that reaching orgasm and ejaculation gave them. And really, until now they prefer to live like animals, rather than do the conscious work of self-realization. We see that anyone is told about self-knowledge, about the importance of learning to refuse desire and stop spilling their waters, or sexual creative energy, in order to escape from the state of unconsciousness, but they refuse to do so. They prefer to continue in materialism, or cling to any belief, so as not to have to deny themselves the pleasure of expelling their waters from the amphora. Collective fornication was called the universal flood. Since, from that moment on, it has not stopped raining inside us, because all the time we are misusing and expelling our sexual waters. Due to this, the human mind became animal through desire. By continuing to fornicate, all our animalistic ways of being, selves, or eyes, were formed within us. And all the created egos were taken in pairs to Noah's Ark, which represents our seminal envelope. And it is said that they were carried in pairs, because all our psychological defects are dual, they have a positive and a negative aspect. That is why we need to draw wisdom from both, good and evil. And this was done so that, on the day we decide to regenerate, we find the raw material to work on ourselves in our creative energy of the Holy Spirit. From there, will come love or fire, and wisdom or light, when learning to die in oneself. If you reflect a little on this, you can discover many things. By carrying out the construction of the existential bodies, wisely investing the sexual creative energy in the practice of supra-sex, we develop the Christmas tree. This is developed by working with the tree of wisdom, releasing the sparks trapped in the duality of the ego, in order to raise the kundalini, and create the existential bodies. This will put an end to the kundabuffer organ. And also working with the tree of life, through the practice of supra-sex or sex for regeneration. This is how the Christmas tree develops in our spine. There, Santa Claus, who represents an aspect of our being, places the different gifts, which are the virtues, powers, faculties, forces, bodies, etc., that are obtained by carrying out the initiations of the first mountain, until get to live the Christmas of the heart, when our individual Christ is born. Without the Christmas tree, there will be no individual Christ. And since the Christ is the way to reach God, if we don't achieve that the intimate Christ is born in us, we will not achieve the objective of reaching our inner divinity. Now you will understand why the two trees have common roots, sex. The secrets of the AZF Arcanum. If the exit was through sex, the return to paradise must also be through sex. If we don't learn to practice supra-sex, there will be no possible regeneration. In sex lies the possibility of being of every human being. In sex there is the possibility of the second birth, which is the birth in the spiritual world. With work on the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness, we will extract all the secrets of the arc. Now, the most important thing is to understand the hypnotism in which we find ourselves, which doesn't allow us to value or have a true objective of existing. It is very important that we reflect on this. The first step to begin a process of regeneration, awakening of consciousness, and recovery of lost powers, consists of leaving that state of hypnotism in which we find ourselves with all the things and circumstances that fascinate us in this material world. If we understand the illusion in which we find ourselves with the passing things of the material world, we will see how important it is to start working on our inner world. In this way, having already received this knowledge for self-realization, we will be able to dedicate our existence to achieving the purpose that brings us here, and reach the levels of wisdom that we have the capacity to achieve. It is essential that we also understand the importance that the sexual part has for this purpose. And that we understand that there are only 2 types of marriage. The marriages that are made for the purpose of fornication, which currently is all of them. Because all human beings on this planet seek only pleasure and fun, animal enjoyment without transcendent desires. And there is also the marriage where one commits to the Holy Spirit, which is one's own sexual creative energy, to never fornicate, in order to self-realize the being. This is by sexually uniting with a stable partner of the opposite sex in fidelity, chastity, and love. In this way the process called regeneration will begin. That regeneration is to recover the lost power. It is also beginning to live the process that we saw in the last conference, when we talked about the kinari, the Genesis process. This, to get to become true men, recover all the power and regenerate our seed. When one goes to work on the tree of life, through suprasex, fire and water must always go inward and upward. The ascending fire is called Kundalini. When the sacred fire of Kundalini is lit in us, the entire Black Lodge comes to tempt us. So, we have to be very cautious not to fall into adultery, because everything would be lost. But there is something else. If after the Kundalini is lit, the person continues to fornicate, for each fornication he loses 2 vertebrae of energy in the spinal column. And if we are going to see someone who wants to lift, or fill with energy, 33 vertebrae by 7 bodies, it is a long work, and it costs a lot. It takes approximately 24 sexual practices to raise those 2 vertebrae that were lost in the sexual fall. That is why we must understand how important it is to practice sex with love, fidelity, and chastity. We must take this into account. The most important thing. The reproduction of the beast, which is the ego in us, is carried out through fornication, adultery, and lack of love. When any of these occur, we work to conquer the abyss. If we are going to end the ego, we have to stop creating more ego. If we continue expelling the sexual creative energy through orgasm and ejaculation, the ego will continue to grow. It is necessary to start serious work against fornication, because it is what, on the physical plane, uses up all the energy that the physical body condenses. We must also know that the greater the knowledge, the greater the responsibility. When a person already has this knowledge, they have to decide. Because already knowing the power of energy, the definition will be angel or demon, there is no more. If, knowing the power that sexual energy contains, we decide to stop spilling it, and begin to make it ascend through our spine through the practice of suprasex, we will become angels. All angels in their different hierarchies were born in sex. But if, on the contrary, knowing the power and value of sexual energy, we continue to pour it out, without abandoning the animal pleasure of orgasm and ejaculation, then we will continue to become more and more perverse, sleeping our conscience more and more. And thus, we will end up becoming real demons. There are only those 2 alternatives. Either you go one way, or you go the other. Knowledge has always been a great responsibility. Once we have the knowledge, we act awake, consciously. This lecture, being the last of this first part of the course, can be hard and even complex to understand. But the invitation is to reflect on it, to ask our own being to give us light, clarity on the path that leads us to self-realization, and to understand if this path is really found in the wise use of sex. And for this we have the tools: meditation, astral projection, reflection, etc. The invitation we always make is to practice, check, investigate, and achieve your own inner knowledge. And well, this has been today's topic. With this we conclude Phase A of this self-knowledge course. All conferences will be recorded here on the page, in case you want to consult them at any time, and you can also always contact us to resolve any concerns you may have. Soon we will be starting the cycle of 25 conferences, of the second part of this course. Thank you very much to everyone who joined us in this cycle of the course. We wish you a lot of encouragement, and a lot of strength, in your own inner work.